So here's the purpose of this code customization. If you look at the general IronSpeed Designer created pages, you obviously have filters and you have the ability to sort and search and do a variety of different things. But in some cases, you want to be able to, in addition to all of those features, you want to be able to pass the values of a particular filter on the URL. As an example, notice what we have done over here. What we want to do is essentially say, show product table page, supplier equal, and give it a value, exotic. The %20 is simply a space, exotic liquids, and category equal beverages. Now, you may want to pass one value or both values or no values. So you want to be able to support essentially a page that can do any of those things. No values, one or two filter values, and go from there. And when that is selected, what you want to be able to do is you want to essentially set the filters to those values and then only display the particular values here. So as an example, I'm going to switch back to my designer. I'm going to switch back to my IE here. Again, these are all, okay, I'm going to close this. Okay, there you go. Okay, so I've got this particular page on training one. So if I were to, now I'm looking at the products page. If I simply go back and say, sorry, this is question mark, and looks like I already have a URL in my cache over here. If I select that and click this, hopefully what it'll do is it'll open up and show only for this value. So if I were to essentially say condiments, for example, so I could basically go through and say category equal condiments, and I do that. Hopefully, it'll only show me all of the condiments category over in this column. So that, and then it's already initialized to the condiments over here. So that's the goal that we want to accomplish. So the first, and what we want to do is we want to be able to display that the first time around the page is displayed. So let's go back to the PowerPoint over here and let's talk about the strategy. So in this particular case, there are no layout customizations. We're not changing anything on the layout. And all we need to do is we need to essentially modify the code customization. Well, there are two code customizations that I need to modify or add. The first thing that I need to do is override what's called the create where clause to include the URL parameters that are passed in on the URL. So that's what we want to do, is override the create where clause. Second thing we need to do is override the populate filter methods to set the current value. So simply by overriding the create where clause, the create where clause will filter the table that is displayed over here, but it will not update these drop-downs with the current values, basically, with the selected value. So we need to make both of those customizations, one to essentially filter and the other to select this one. Okay, so those are the two code customizations that we need to do. And what we're going to do is, again, while this presentation contains kind of a step-by-step instructions, I'll go ahead and do this to show you how this is accomplished in IronSpeed Designer here. So in this particular case, what we want to do, first of all, let me delete some of these changes that I made so that my application is built easily. I don't want these text format, and there you go. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I don't have get into some other problem over here while displaying. I'm going to delete this new button as well. Okay, there you go. So what I want to do here is I want to essentially make sure that there are no other build errors or anything like that. Okay, so no build errors. I'm going to mark this as automatically close. And then what I'm going to do is I need to override the create where clause here. So what I'll do is I'll go back and bring this up. Again, what my goal here is to make the create where clause applies to the entire table. So most likely it's under the table control class. So sure enough, when I go back over here, I have the create where clause. Now these sections under the code, they are defined basically on generic things and then specific to a button or a particular control that is displayed on the table. So in this case, I'm going to override the create where clause, and this will insert a shall create where clause over here. And what I will do, oops, what did I do? Okay. shall create where clause. So now again, since I'm not such a good typist here in real time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the code for this, and then I will walk you through what I have actually done here. So I'm going to highlight this thing. I'm going to delete my default one, and then I'll paste here, and let's walk through what I'm trying to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to call my base create where clause. Why do I need to call my base create where clause? Well, the reason for that is that the user may have entered a variety of other criteria on the page. So, for example, the user may have entered the search, for example, or user may have selected a sorting criteria, and so on. So I want to first basically say let Iron Designer generated code do its work. So I'm going to call the base where clause. And if there is no base where clause, I'm just going to create that is returned from the underlying create where clause. I'm going to simply create an empty where clause. Then I'm going to do something very important over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check if this is a postback. Now, if you remember from your .NET classes, what postback means is that when the page is first displayed, it's not considered a postback. But when the user makes some changes on the page, let's say the user selects a different value from the filter, or the user searches for a particular value, or the user sorts a particular thing, that essentially sends a message back to the page, and that message back is considered postback. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure that we only filter by the URL values the first time around, meaning that if the user goes back and changes the values, changes the filters the second and the third time, we want to ignore the URL values and respect the wishes of the user to essentially go to the other filter values or other values from that point onwards. So all we want to do is display filtered to the URL the first time around, basically. Well, how can we do that? Well, what we can do is look at the isPostback flag. If the isPostback flag is set to true, that means the user has made some changes and we're coming back to this page the second time around. This is standard .NET, nothing to do with Iron Designer. And so what we said is if isPostback is true, then what we want to do is return whatever where clause was returned by the underlying create where clause function. We don't want to do anything more, and we are done with it, basically. If it's the first time around, we will fall through here, and we'll do something with the URL parameters. So the first thing I do is I get the supplier from a query string. Essentially, again, I'm doing the standard .NET thing, me.page.request.query string, and I pass in some text string, which is the value of the URL parameter that is passed in. So it's a supplier and category. I get those two values. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this is not nothing, meaning that a supplier is actually specified. Then I am going to take the standard where clause that I created before, and I'm going to AND it. And I'm going to AND it essentially with essentially a clause that passes in the supplier. Now, in this case, let me explain to you what the IAND does in a minute here. But I will add one for supplier and one for category, and then return the where clause. So that's how simple it is for you to essentially add a where clause based on a filter value. Now let's go through the IAND over here and understand what it is. Remember that every where clause is essentially three things effectively, right? You've got the field, an operator, and a value. So you could say supplier ID equal something or the other, basically, right? So what we want to do is the first thing is what field. And the field is basically, from my table, products table or customers table or categories table, dot the name of the field, basically. So that's the first argument to the IAND. Second argument is a operator, and I can select contains, I can select, starts with, ends with, and all of those values. And again, IntelliSense is great in terms of allowing you to essentially look at all of the different values. The third thing, of course, is that what I want to do is pass in the value of the supplier that I have retrieved from the URL. So that's basically your create where clause, the field name, the operator value, the operator, and the value, basically. There is, however, a fourth argument over here that is true, and that is a very important argument that you want to know about, basically. And here's the reason why we need to do this thing. Now, normally, what is the supplier ID in the products table? It's most likely a number. It's an ID, like 37 or 42 or 57 and so on. Now, obviously, we do not expect our users to pass in, supplier equal 37 or supplier equal 47, for example, and so on. We are expecting our users to pass in the actual text value of that supplier. So what we need to do is we can't just basically pass in a supplier name called exotic liquids or whatever else the supplier name is and expect it to match an ID number from the products table. So what we need to do is we need to essentially do one other level of lookup. We need to be able to essentially tell the where clause that, hey, listen, you can't use the supplier text just like that. You need to be able to go do a lookup in the supplier table for the name, find its ID, then use that ID in this where clause effectively. And that's why we need to pass in essentially a true flag for the fourth item here, which indicates that this is essentially an expansion of the display foreign key as basically value that we are going to do. So that's why we are passing in true over here. If you were passing in false, then this obviously the value would not match the supplier ID and it would not work. So that's the first code customization I need to do. The second, so hopefully that explains how the display foreign key is expanded. This particular parameter is called expand foreign key. That's the name of the parameter effectively. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back, switch over to my thing over here. And then what I want to do is I want to override the populate methods for both of these filters in order to essentially set the current value for that. So let's see how we can do that. What I'm going to do is go back to the table control class, and I have populate category ID filter. And I'm going to override that function. And then I need to do the same thing with populate. So I'm going to switch back over, and I'm going to insert my category ID, and then the other one was populate supplier ID filter. Okay, so I'm going to add the populate supplier ID filter. And so now I've got the shell functions for both of them. Just below my create where clause that was here, there's a populate category and populate supplier ID filter. I'm going to again go back in cheat and copy my things over here. So which function was this? This was supplier ID. So this is supplier ID. I'm going to copy this and paste here and indent, and we'll walk through that in a minute here. And then we'll do the same thing for the supplier ID, the category ID, and I will walk you through what I'm doing over here. So in the case of the populate, what we're going to do is we're going to basically call the underlying, my base, and what this will do is, of course, populate all of the base category IDs over here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to request the URL parameter, and then only if it is not a postback, meaning that it is being displayed for the first time, and the URL value is not nothing, meaning that there is actually a value specified. All I do is I call, and this is standard .NET code, there's nothing magic to it. The only thing I'm doing is I've got a drop down here called category ID filter. I do items.findByText, give it the name of the category, and then what I'm going to do is get that list item. And if that list item is nothing, meaning that there is a list item, I'm going to just simply select the selected flag on that true. So that means that that particular value is going to be displayed from the category ID. And the same exact process is repeated for the supplier ID and any other values that you're passing in. And essentially, this is the supplier. And then I'm going to, instead of calling the category ID filter, I call the supplier ID filter and then do that. So now I can press build and run, and hopefully if there are no compiled messages, because we were making some changes to the application here, my app will be displayed. And then what I can do effectively is show you how I can then pass in, category equal, seafood. So if I do that, And so now all my categories is limited to seafood only, and my category filter is selected. Now I can also pass in, for example, exotic liquids. I don't like to type long names, so maybe that's why I'm trying to choose. So I can say exotic liquids. And there you go. Now in this case, there are no seafood ones by exotic liquids. Now again, if you remember, when we go select a different value, we do not no longer use the URL parameters. So that's why I have the ability to do a variety of things over here without having to worry about the URL parameters being affected by this. Okay, so that's the filter by URL value. We are right on the